Hello and welcome to the Fashion Snoops and FashionGo webinar on COVID-19 insights. Today we'll address key shifts in consumer behavior as well as women's wear trends. My name is Melissa Moylan and I'm VP and Creative Head of Womenswear at FS. If you don't know about Fashion Snoops, we are a global trend forecasting agency. We've been around for 20 years and we serve everyone from manufacturers to brands, retailers. Some of our key markets include women's wear, men's, children's, accessories, beauty, and home. Our research and analysis help fuel clients' needs to understand the shifts that are occurring in the market. And today I'll be joined by my colleague Carrera Kurnik. She is a culture editor at FS, and she'll be addressing COVID-19 consumer emotion mapping. She'll address emotions and stages that are related to the pandemic, and then she'll express how we're able to key into those things and determine what consumers will want in seasons to come. Then I'll join in again for the women's wear trend portion of the presentation, where I will go through 6 thematic directions in relation to COVID-19 and how they are still relevant, as well as colors for the season and key items. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you enjoy the presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is Carrera Kurnik and I am a culture editor at Fashion Snoops. For today's webinar, we're going to start by giving you an overlaying map of the consumer emotions that people are feeling in response to COVID-19. We're also going to be talking to how savvy brands are creating products, services, and marketing messaging that directly responds to these emotions, and how your brand should consider directly responding to consumer emotions in this tumultuous emotional retail climate that we're all experiencing right now. So I'd like to start by sharing a map of the emotions consumers are feeling. So primarily we're feeling a lot of anxiety with moments of gratitude. Consumers are feeling isolated yet inspired. Some feel fear and empathy, while others feel confused with moments of clarity. What's important to note here is that this is not a linear progression. This is a constant cycle. We don't see consumers starting the pandemic off with anxiety and fear, and then 6 months later, reaching this end point of gratitude and clarity. This is a constant cycle. There are no fixed points, and from one day to the next, we might feel completely different emotions. Another important thing to note here is the linkage between these emotions. They're almost like the negative and positive sides of certain behaviors. So on one side, we might be anxious about the unknown, but on the other side, consumers will feel gratitude for what they have. Same with responses to lockdown. We might feel isolated and stifled, or we could feel inspired, creative, artistic. When it comes to fear, this is an internalizing of energy, and where we see consumers thinking of themselves and fear of what might happen to themselves. When we shift to empathy, we see that consumers are worried more about the community, what will happen to others, how can they help. Finally, many consumers are feeling confusion about all the varying information that is floating around the internet. It's easy to get misinformed. However, in moments of clarity, everything seems to make sense. We understand what's important, our values, and how to proceed forward. One more thing to note here is the varying between consumers. Everyone approaches emotions through their own lens, whether that be through gender, financial bracket, race, age, location. All these factors can have an impact on how we experience our emotions, and I think that's key for brands to understand. So next we're going to move into our first emotion. Please note that we will only have time to go through 3 of these, but the rest of them are explored fully on our site. So first we'll do anxiety, then we'll do fear, and then we'll do empathy. The first consumer emotion we will be speaking to is anxiety. When the pandemic hit, it thrust so much of the world into a state of uncertainty. People no longer knew if they might lose their jobs, if they would get sick, or if they could pay their rent. So coupled with the negative mental health effects of social distancing and isolation, consumers are looking to brands for anxiety solutions. Some core needs here to remember are that consumers are looking for positive messaging on social media, relatable content, and mental health resources. So on this page, we look at some best-in-class examples of how brands are speaking to consumer anxiety. First, we have Snapchat. Its Here For You search tool helps connect anxious and depressed users with mental health services. Next, Molson Coors' Scream for Wine campaign allowed moms to call a toll-free number and vent their frustrations in a cathartic release and a chance to win some canned wine. Finally, during Goop's community office hours, consumers could message experts with questions. Most often these questions were ones on anxiety and anxiety relief. So some key provocations here for brands to consider when appealing to consumer anxiety and trying to soothe their anxiety are, number one, offer consumers authentic and relatable content on social media to help them feel like they're not alone. Number two, many brands are offering anxious consumers soothing products and services like adult coloring books and free meditation apps. Consider how your brand can develop products with your own special spin to help soothe these anxious customers. Finally, number three, brands can partner with mental health resources and psychiatric associations to ensure their consumers are getting the help they most need. So the next emotion I'd like to speak about is fear. The pandemic has destroyed much of the security and safety that consumers may have felt before. Increased health concerns lead to germophobic consumers looking with suspicion at every surface, package, and even human-to-human interaction. Thus, sanitization becomes a core need, as well as products that provide protection to consumers. Consumers are looking to brands to provide them with products that protect them from bacteria and pathogens, and also ease their fears by allowing them to purchase back little bits of certainty and control in an otherwise chaotic world. So I mentioned many of these just now, but key consumer needs here that brands should consider are contactless retail options, sanitization, and survivalist or protection-based products. So on this next page here, we see some best-in-class examples of brands speaking to consumer fear. First, Polygene's Viral Off textile treatment kills 99% of airborne viruses and bacteria. These types of antimicrobial fabrics will be playing a huge role in women's wear and especially children's wear during the rest of the pandemic and even after. In the middle here, we have Samsung's sanitization wardrobe, which eliminates bacteria and odors off of clothing on any kind of fabric. So we may see these types of technologies becoming the new fixture in American homes and homes around the world for that matter, and also in retailing where consumers will be more reluctant to try on clothing unless they know that it's been sanitized efficiently and effectively. And then finally, we're seeing many consumers adopt a survivalist mentality as they look to protect and prepare themselves from the next inevitable shock. So Gorilla Group's fire retardant, thermochromic, and abrasion-resistant products are designed for the core consumer need of protection and survivalism. So those are great examples of how brands are speaking to consumer fears. Next, we're going to talk about some provocations that other brands could keep in mind when designing for this consideration. So number one, people and brands alike should try not to let fear control their lives and stifle their creativity, but strive to turn their fear into fuel to feed creativity and innovation. I think this is a crucial choice that we're all going to need to make in the upcoming months. The next provocation I'd like to say is the consumer need for protection is going from a nice to have to a need to have. So consider designing with protection in mind. And then finally, number three, consumers will expect greater sanitization standards when they return to physical retail stores. So retailers should ensure their layouts are open concept, less crowded, well ventilated, and heavily sanitized. The final consumer emotion I will cover today is empathy. So when the pandemic hit, we saw this enormous outpouring of empathy from people, brands, and governments alike. And it feels like everyone is jumping into action right now to see how they can best help and support others. We see people providing hot meals for their fellow citizens, supporting local businesses, and donating to charities. So in this current empathy revolution we're seeing, consumers are looking to brands to act with compassion and show their support for their local communities. Some key needs for empathetic consumers are displays of generosity, opportunities to help others, and community-oriented values. So on the next slide here, we see some best-in-class examples of brands speaking to this need, this driving motivation of empathy. First, we have Dear Mama Coffee's Fuel the Frontline initiative that provided free coffee to frontline workers as a show of support. Next, the Helping Hugs movement by Huggies recognized that in tough financial times, a lot of families are unable to provide diapers for their young ones. So they actually ended up donating 5 million pairs of diapers to the National Diaper Bank. And then finally, Visa and NFL teamed up in the initiative called Stand for Small Business, in which athletes partnered with small businesses by replacing team jerseys with merchandise from the players' favorite local businesses. These are 3 really great examples of how brands are acting out of empathy in this tough time and centering themselves in the community. Some provocations to keep in mind here include, consumers are feeling this wave of empathy right now. Brands can offer them opportunities to help with give back initiatives that people can feel good about joining in on. Number 2, right now is the time for brands to ask, how can we serve you rather than what can we sell you? Customers are really going to appreciate brands that put people over profit in these tough times. And then number 3, people are looking to companies to be a source of good in their communities. Brands should highlight community frontline heroes and essential workers and collaborate with small businesses to show their support. So to conclude on the next slide here, we may all be facing the same problem, but the solutions are not one size fits all. Brands and companies will need to pay close attention to their specific consumers' emotional needs to ensure the right products and services, as well as marketing campaigns, are being employed for optimal success. And with that, I will pass you all over to Melissa. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you, Carrera, for that great insight on culture. I know it will be even more important now than ever to really tap into the emotions of consumers moving forward. And now we're going to segue into the women's wear trends for both fall, winter 2021, as well as a little preview of spring, summer 21. So we're going to identify 4 thematic messages. We'll be addressing mood boards, as well as influences, color palettes, patterns and graphics, key items, and then we have a checklist for each one that identifies pretty much the 10 most important things to take away. So without further ado, we'll kick it off with a fall winter 2021 message that we feel strongly about called Pasto. And Pasto really taps into that notion of what is essential, less is more minimalism. So we could see that consumers are more keen on investing in things that they will have for a long time in their closet. The notion of wardrobe builders or staples will become much more important and relevant to them. So what we were inspired by with Pasto, it serves as this notion of a master key. It unlocks Dutch mid-century design, and we're inspired by little-known towns in the Netherlands, such as Delft, which is a big place for rural crafts, ceramic goods, as well as furnishings. So we start to see a lot of beautiful terracotta hues, geometry as it's applied to patterns and graphics. Also, any sort of raw element applies to your staple fabrics. So overall, Pasto, with its minimalist slant, it is a purveyor of modern heritage. The color palette that we're expressing for pastel, you can see a lot of warmth towards the top of the palette with the notion of what we call a cardinal rust red, also a jolt orange, and merit, which is like a mustard tone. What's also super important here is the bottom portion of the palette where we have, as I like to call it, 1000 shades of beige. So different neutrals ranging from mushroom, which is a little bit darker, to sand, as well as kava. And then also what's super important is leveraging brown, which we call burro, as a base tone here. A couple of other highlights would be the green tones, as well as a little bit of soft hues, which are positioned right under those warm tones at the top of the palette. So the soft ones would be secret, as well as dip. The pattern and graphics conversation that we see being really important here, keeping in mind that notion of classics and wardrobe building and staples. So things that we're familiar with, classic stripes, checks, plaid patterns become super important, and how we could reinvent them and add a little bit of newness. There's also, of course, a notion that speaks a little bit more to retro sensibility with geometrics or florals or even dots. We could also take this conversation into something that's a little bit more artistic with abstract motifs or a patched medley expression. The key items that we're looking at here, keeping in mind that wardrobe builder or essential mentality, we have the overcoat. So this sweeping long overcoat that falls almost to the ankles becomes super important, even going into the spring season. We're seeing it just in lighter materials. So it's almost like a relaxed duster shape. It's really left open so you could see what's exposed underneath. And speaking to that, next we have the tunic. Something else that's interesting about this take on minimalism is the notion of kind of long layers. So the tunic obviously being a key player in that, and then pairing it against a more voluminous bottom. Next, we have a sweater dress, which is also something super important that we believe in going forward for spring as well. And the reason being is just this notion of comfort that we've all kind of craved since being home in light of COVID. We are comforted by the notion of wearing sweaters and knits. So that's something that's going to be more important in our wardrobe than it has in the past. This particular style of a sweater dress featuring the self belt and then a nice fringe detail. Something else to incorporate here is the blazer. So obviously more of a tailored component. We have the strong boxy shoulders, and it adds a structured or more sophisticated notion to something that's a little bit more casual underneath. Additional items here, the pleated skirt. I would draw particular mind to that mid-calf silhouette, even though this particular example is a maxi. The mid-calf definitely continues to be one of the key messages. A little bit of a point of difference here would be the color blocked or side panel details. To speak to the bottom conversation, it's all about volume, and it continues to be a key message for your pants. So we have a culotte shape, which has some interesting pleat front details to it. Then we also have just a nice casual slouchy pant, which I think looks really great and adds a little bit of a retro tinge with a high pile fabric like corduroy. We also have that slim fitted turtleneck with the rib knit, and then a little bit of a point of difference. So consider, yes, the turtleneck is such a classic item, but how could we update it? The rib knit adds a little bit of point of difference, but also the split sleeves. So your checklist for pastel, keeping in mind that we were inspired by Dutch mid-century design, it's overall minimalism, there's terracotta hues, brown is leveraged as a base. Knitwear becomes a little bit more important, especially that rib knit, also leading into intarsia. Geometrics as a pattern, or any of those great classic plaids or checks. Artistic abstracts, long layers, midi shapes, and mixed media, which could be achieved either in combination of mixed materials or mixed patterns. Now headed into the next theme that we have for fall winter. This one is called Terraform, and it's very much rooted in nature. I think we could say in a lot of ways we have turned to nature in light of the pandemic, and we're looking at nature for more design inspiration as we move forward. So here, terraform, the word actually comes from the process that's used to alter another planet's atmosphere and ecology to be similar to Earth. So we're looking at that as a broad kind of macro idea as we search for the future of humanity. So we could see a lot of surface interest here that's inspired by mimicking the typography of Earth. So protection and survival also are two key things that come to mind, both from a cultural context as well as a thematic placement. We'll see things such as padded or quilted effects, especially when it comes to outerwear. The color palette that we're looking for at Terraform, you could definitely see that it is very earth inspired, starting with those earthy greens towards the bottom, spell as well as sublime. We also have some nice mid-tones of blue towards the top. The yellows balance it out nicely in terms of those mustard, merit color, as well as curry. And then we have some nice dusty hues towards the bottom that I think balance out the palette nicely, orbit and flush. And those lead into a purple, which is a little bit unexpected here, but I think it's also something that we're starting to see a lot more of. The pattern and graphic conversation, here we're again mimicking Earth's surface as we could in terms of prints and pattern. So anything like a mineral swirl, a supernatural surface or effect. Also anything like an artistic atmosphere or dye effect. And the dye effect I think is especially relevant in light of COVID, where we've seen so many different varieties of tie-dyes. So this is something that we believe in going forward. It's just adjusting it and making it a little bit fresher by using different earth-rooted colors. Something else that I'd like to draw your attention to would be the notion of an animal print here. So again, keeping in mind that nature inspiration, this is a great place to throw in an animal print. I would suggest something like a reptile, which we haven't seen as much as a leopard, for example. Some items here, we have a parka. This is an oversized shape. It's definitely built for winter. There's some nice contrast details as well as blocked effects happening with some nice tonal colors. We have a cargo pant. This particular one set in a wide leg. It really could run the gamut from silhouette shape on bottoms. Also consider irregular pocket placement when it comes to the cargo itself. We have the sweater dress, which is fully embracing that notion of an animal print. And then we have a turtleneck, which is a slimmer fit, different from what we saw previously in that it's a cut and sew knit. It has extra material on the sleeves that almost look like ruching, but the point here is really to layer it. So for example, that could be layered underneath the sweater dress. Some additional key items that we have: the jumpsuit, the all-in-one, super important, and it kind of checks that box next to utility. Has an oversized fit as well as the self-belted waist. Another great item for outerwear is the puffer, and we really believe in this from a protection standpoint, that's going to be something, that idea of protection, we're all very familiar with it at this point. But the puffer, that's something that will continue to move forward. This particular style is of interest because it has that funnel neck and it's almost like an extra layer of protection. Leather pants, we have seen them before. We'll continue to see them in various shapes. I would encourage you to explore alternatives to black in either leather or faux leather, of course, but some of those nice earthy tones are really nice with that style. And then we have an oversized sweater. So again, it's a little bit more of a relaxed silhouette. We've got a mock neck, extra long sleeves to kind of emphasize that notion of the oversized shape. Your checklist for Terraform, the things that need to come to mind would be protection as well as survival, earthy greens, cargo utility, surface interest, whether it comes in the form of materials or a pattern and graphic motif, utility, jumpsuits, puffers, dye effects, and how to kind of reinvent those with earth tones, parkas, as well as quilting. Our next narrative that we have for fall winter, and this one in particular is relevant for the holiday season. So you definitely see that romance coming through. We call it curio parlor, and we imagine this as a rare and intriguing manner, but it's brimming with these modern sort of unfiltered notions of romance. So we could see it as a cabinet of curiosities. There are decorative touches that we could feature here, but it's a different expression of femininity. There could be things that read a little bit more boudoir. There could be something that reads a little bit more ornate. So I think the point here is that we're celebrating this woman as an individual with all of her imperfections. That's also something that's very key for that Gen Z customer, as they're very big on imperfections and kind of celebrating that notion. So we look at curio parlor as the new dawn of modern romance. Taking a look at that color palette, you could definitely see how I think it applies to the holiday season. So we have some really great blush tones here, pink camellia, as well as a soft pink, which we still need to have, utopia. We're also shifting into more coral tones such as settle. There are some really great purples here, as we've seen in another palette, but it really starts to grow with that notion of romance. There's some warm colors as well, like the soft buttery yellow and radiance. And then just the notion of various pastels and how we could kind of compose those with the blush tones. So the one at the top, foam, is like a nice mint color, as well as the blue at the bottom. The pattern and graphic conversation, this is obviously where you want to include any of the florals. So that could be anything from your floral intrigue or embrace, a variety of different motifs to apply there. Something else to consider along the lines of dye effects is that here we're looking at what we call phosphorescent effects. So here it appears phosphorescent just because the material tends to be a little bit more shiny, but also applying some of those really nice pastels that we've seen in the palette. A couple of other things to pay attention to in terms of graphic motifs would be birds as a new subject, as well as new feminine persona or quotes that are empowering. Some of the items that we're looking at here, another great example of an overcoat, but here you could see that there's a lot more to it. It's more of a lustrous material. It's got the added effect of the feather trim to it. In terms of a woven top, we have a wrap top that's a key silhouette, which will move forward for woven shirts. And here it has the added element of the puff sleeve. There's also a maxi dress, which we see here with a pattern throughout, longer sleeves. And then we have a midi skirt. This is another one, as we saw or we mentioned in one of the other themes. This particular variety, it's more of a pencil shape, so we are shifting more back into the pencil, something to look forward to. The hemline falls just below the knee, and then it also has the addition of the slit for movement. Some other items for curio parlor, we have the blazer. This one definitely tapping into that notion of holiday. So consider satiny materials. Again, you don't have to pair it with a dress. It could just serve to elevate a look and make it a little bit more sophisticated. The slouchy pant also gets a little bit of an elevated statement with more of a fluid, silky material for this season. Speaking also back to that conversation of essentials and kind of wardrobe builders, the slip dress is one of those kind of classic items that's still going to be important going into winter and holiday for evening. And I think it's because it's such an easy item, you could update it easily with something like an lace trim, also update in terms of color. And then finally, another option for your woven top assortment, the statement sleeve blouse or the puff sleeve blouse, however you like to call it. Super important here, mixed media application or blocking, and then a lace trim detail. So your checklist here, inspired again by this notion of modern romance, cabinet of curiosity. The colors to focus on would be those blush or passion colors. So recalling the pinks, also headed into purples. Boudoir, super important when it comes to trim especially. Florals, this is the place to place them. Slip dresses, silky materials, wrap shapes, puff sleeves in terms of your silhouettes, as well as feather trim. And now finally rounding it out with our fourth thematic story or narrative. This one looks into spring summer and something that we feel really powerfully about. We call this solstice. And I think it's just a feel good theme that's like a breath of fresh air after everything that we've all been through this year, headed into spring 21. And so here, solstice, we are inspired by this notion of a secret remote destination in Greenland, rolling green hills, flower-covered paths. And it's really getting back into the simplicity and easy joys of life. Midsummer ceremonies really inspired us. And we were looking at, just overall life is simple, what things bring beauty to the surface, decorative elements, all for anything from embroidered lace to pretty petal accents. The color palette that we're looking at here also, I think, really refreshing. Keep in mind the importance of white here. There's something that always is evoked by white, this sense of purity and almost, a palette cleanser to everything that we've gone through before. So I think that will be really important. But speaking to some of the other colors here, it's a whimsical palette. There are a lot of nice calming blues towards the top of it, from clarity to tempo, and then there's some nice pinks. Again, with our pink conversation, we're headed into a little bit more of a coral territory, so keep that in mind with colors such as flounce. We also have some really beautiful yellows, neutrals to balance out the palette, and then a couple different pops of either the charged red or the green at the bottom. The pattern and graphics that we're seeing for solstice, this one we just called folkloric charm. This could apply to any kind of floral motif. It could go in a direction that's almost bohemian and really just lighthearted, especially when it comes to the colors. We see that especially with like some of those blue on white prints. Then moving into, again, this notion of classic prints and patterns, as we've explored in the fall winter season with some of the notions of stripes, plaids, or checks. So shifting into spring summer, something like a gingham kinship. This also feels really comfortable and comforting to us, almost very indicative of a picnic and the simple joys. Some of the key items here that we have once again the puff sleeve top, so consider lace here. Don't go full on lace, but just use elements or different embroideries that just evoke this notion, almost like of an heirloom passed down through the generations. Then we have a maxi dress. This is great, it's a slip shape, so once again moving forward with your easy slip silhouette, and then applying some really beautiful florals to it. Your culottes are here once again, super crisp cotton poplin, but the difference here is that there's a nice little whimsical embroidered detail to it. We've got a shirt dress. So this is again evolving that notion of the classic shirt. How do we update it with the shirt dress with a classic shirting stripe pattern to it is a really great way. Some additional items, we have the mini dress. Here again, you could see how it embraces kind of beautiful trim and hook and eye closures and things of that nature that just make it whimsical. It also has a nice attention to the puff sleeve. A knit dress. So I had mentioned earlier just the importance of knitwear and sweaters, and the sweater dress as an item that just brings us comfort even in the spring season. We have a bra top, which is geared towards more of the young contemporary junior set, as well as a romper. This particular style is set to a flower crochet, which makes it much more novelty, but we could definitely see this done in cottons as well. So your checklist for solstice, inspired again from midsummer ceremonies, easy essential pieces, materials such as lace as well as open work or crochet, white as a color, picnicky ginghams, folkloric prints, the notion of dresses in terms of a sundress, knits that are applied for summer, puff sleeves, either in a blouse format or a dress, as well as whimsical embroidered details. So that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for joining us from Fashion Snoops as well as FashionGo for the opportunity. We hope you found it informative. Thank you.